Welcome to Life with Beth and Court,
where we teach you how to live authentically and build your best life,
one step at a time.
What are we mic checking with today?
Well, since our research took us down quite the rabbit hole about our topic today, and we learned that introverts and extroverts are very opposite from each other, it took me back to the 90s.
Did it?
Yes. Do you remember Paula Abdul?
Well, I mean, I know who she is. I wouldn't say I remember her.
I was obsessed with her.
Okay.
She was the reason, well, her and Madonna and Gloria Estefan were the reason that I wanted to be a choreographer.
Oh,
And
okay.
I really thought I could do it.
Who was your inspiration for wanting to be Latina?
Oh, Selena. The phase where I had hoop earrings and slicked my hair back. And the only problem was I could not speak a different language. I couldn't sing, and I looked nothing like her. But she inspired me to be Latina.
So what you're saying is the only problem with your aspirations to be Latina is that you are not, in fact, Latina.
Correct. But I
Okay.
tried very hard. Selena was another inspiration. Anyway, today's mic check is coming from Paula Abdul and MC Scat Cat. I think that's who it was.
All right.
You ready?
Doesn't scat mean poop?
I'm not sure.
Like bear scat.
Oh, yeah, you think you're right.
So he's MC
Poop cat.
Crap Cat?
Why am I laughing like a child about you saying poop?
Well,
Everybody poops.
it's pretty funny.
You ready? We'll see if you remember this one. I take 2 steps forward. I take 2 steps back. We come together 'cause opposites attract, and you know it ain't fiction, just a natural fact. We come together 'cause opposites attract. I feel like you should have been videoing that. Did you see my head?
I did, and
Yeah.
you even got the guitar part. Is that the one that had the music video with the
Yes.
cat, like the
Yeah.
cartoon?
MC Scat Cat was the cartoon. Like, I don't think
Oh,
we
the
ever
poop
actually
cat
saw
was the
him.
cartoon.
Yeah, we're probably gonna have to link
Got
that
it.
in this episode.
Okay, got it. All right. Show notes will contain the video
Poop
that
cat.
we are describing very poorly right now. Is that all you have for mic check today?
Yeah, my throat hurts
Yeah, you're a little under the weather, aren't you?
just a little.
Oh.
Like probably 23 degrees under the weather.
So a tish. Would
A
you say that's a
tish.
tish under the weather?
Tish.
Welcome back to another episode of Life with Beth and Court. I'm Beth.
I'm Court.
And today we're talking about introvert, extrovert, ambivert. Which are you?
Whoa.
I know.
You sounded like a BuzzFeed quiz.
Yeah, well, and that's really where there are a lot of quizzes that give you kind of terrible results.
How many did you take?
I mean, over the course of the years, many.
No, I mean like before we did this episode.
Oh, I
'cause
think I
took
only
4.
did 2.
Okay.
One of them I was like, I knew on question 3, I was like, you're not legit. I want to quit. But I couldn't because I just needed to finish it. And so I
'cause-
did.
yeah.
And then at the end, I was like, no, you're dumb. You're still dumb.
Did both of you say the same thing? did
I
one
don't
say-
remember the first one where I thought it was dumb. I don't think I filed the response in my brain. It just slipped away.
Wow.
I read it and let it go.
Well, interestingly enough, we teased this out on social media and we asked you who you thought was who and who was introvert and who was extrovert.
Ooh, what did they say?
They thought I was the extrovert and they thought you were the introvert.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Well,
But kind of not really.
not really. Okay, so
Let's explain.
we're going to have to jump into this so that we can explain WTF we're talking about. There's always been the ambivert category. I think we typically talk about it in a dichotomy of just introvert or extrovert. And as we read and researched, it's very rare actually that someone's all the way introvert or all the way extrovert.
Which is confusing because I think up until our research dig, I always thought at least like you were either extrovert or introvert, like you were one polar extreme or the other. And so we found this really fascinating article that we went down a deep, deep rabbit hole. We learned some new words of things in the brain and it was just really
It was a
fascinating.
really smart article is what it was.
So we took some notes as we talk through this today to kind of talk about I think we should go through what extrovert and introverts look like through different phases. So like in the workplace, in relationships, because I think people can really identify and relate to one or the other, because although we have this preconceived notion of what extrovert and introvert are, I think it looks very differently. Like some of them I was like, oh, I wouldn't think that was an extrovert. Like some made sense, but some didn't. So I think it's good to dive in and unpack that in different categories and situations.
So I think that as we talk about it today, it's important to remember that it is a scale, and that, you know, according to the research, about 77% of people self-identify somewhere in the middle of the scale. So as we talk about the definitions of each, I think it'll be fun for me and you to go through situations and actually describe how we as humans feel in those different situations, and why that then lends itself to both of us being ambiverts.
Ambiverts?
No, ambiverts.
Omnivores. For like 5 days leading up to this, I kept asking her, I was like, ambivert, omnivore.
At one point, you're like, what's it called? Like the Ambien one? And I was
Ambien,
like, no, what are you talking about?
Ambien's
She's
the
like,
sleeping
introvert,
drug.
extrovert, Ambien?
Ambien.
No.
Or
And then she was like, omnivore.
And I
was
started
like,
talking about dinosaurs.
what are you talking about right now? So no, the 3 areas are introvert, extrovert, and then somewhere in the middle is ambivert. Not omnivores.
If I say Ambien, I just need us to roll with it, because I'm not going to put this much energy into remembering it.
Basically, extroverts look for their energy outside of themselves. Introverts look for their energy within themselves.
Correct.
And an ambivert is a combination of both.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest things when you're talking about introvert, extrovert, ambivert is a lot of times people get it very confused with it is a portion of your personality, but like, for instance, when people see that I'm outgoing, they're like, oh, you have to be an extrovert. And I'm like, no, I'm outgoing, but I get my energy from within. So for me, I often get misclassified because they see me being outgoing, being able to talk to people, being able to be the center of attention, being able to be the life of the party. And so they automatically assume, oh, you're an extrovert. No, I don't get my energy from those interactions. I get my energy afterwards, when I get to go home and be alone and recharge and not be around. When I'm around other humans, it's not that I don't like them. It's that I don't get charged by that.
Right.
I get charged by being alone, or getting to go on a hike or work out or do something that's just me with my own self in my head.
And I think for me, it surprises people, because I think hands down, I know for a fact when I meet people, they're like, oh, you're an extrovert. Like 100%, hands down, high extrovert. But at the same time, like, it really just depends. I can be charged. I love conversation. I love conversation one-on-one. I love it in small groups. And when I'm at a party or a big event, I do feel really charged and energized in that moment. But as far as recharging after, I do need that alone time to recharge. And I think that's why I'm an ambivert, because I can go either way. It's a matter of charging it within the environment and finding energy, but then recharging myself is a different process.
For me, it's situational. When it comes to a party, for instance, let's just say we're going to go to a party. We know that we have a party on Saturday. The party day is coming upon us. Mm-hmm. You're excited to go. Yeah. You're charged
I got my
up.
Dress, my heels, my lipstick, my hair.
You're excited to see these people, right? And I am secretly hoping it gets canceled due to snow, even though it's June. You know?
That's a far fetch, but you have said things like that.
Yeah. But it's because I saw this Twitter feed once that said, I know I agreed to go out, but that was 2 hours ago when I was young and full of hope.
That's true.
So that's how it feels for me, is I know that I'll have a good time when I actually go to the party. And I love the people, the hypothetical people that will be at this party.
Right.
I know that I'll enjoy their company. I know that we'll have great conversation. I know that we'll laugh. I know that it'll feel good in the moment. But for whatever reason, I'm just like, man, it would be great if it got canceled and I could just stay home and like watch a movie instead.
And I look forward to the ramp up. Like, I'm excited about the energy that's going to be there. I'm looking forward to it, knowing on the other side, I just need to recharge solo for a little bit. Like, I need a day at the house after that. So just knowing my flow, like where it's going to dip and how I need to recharge after that, I'm fully looking forward to the event.
When we were doing some research on the introvert, extrovert, ambivert conversation, typically it's pretty high level, surface level conversation, right? Like it gets mistaken a lot because people don't actually know a whole lot about what it means to be introvert, extrovert, and they get it confused with being outgoing or shy. And so we were doing some research today, and they've actually studied the brains of introverts and extroverts. And we discovered that, I say we discovered, like we
They
did the
discovered
experiments.
we are sharing information.
Right. Yeah. They discovered that the brain actually lights up differently
On an MRI scan.
In response to stimuli from introverts versus extroverts.
To keep it from going down the deep neuroscience rabbit hole, basically my interpretation of that was it's based on where the dopamine flows and how it flows and how that affects the brain. So I know when they were talking about the dopamine that the blood flow is increased to different areas of the brain on introverts and extroverts. For extroverts, the parts that light up are processing emotions, socially driven interactions, executive function, working memory, semantics, memory, and language. And then when you look over on the introvert side, it talks about how there's a heightened responsiveness in the areas of motor, cognitive, and behavioral functions of the brain. And so it's just really interesting because it talks about based on where the blood is flowing and where it's giving that energy. Basically, as we were reading through it, I'm like, oh yeah, these things are easier for me and come more naturally, and these things are more challenging.
Well, so to translate those things into not a smarty big brain way, for us normal people over here, what it looks like is introverts, they reflect more before making decisions, whereas extroverts, they make decisions quickly.
Yep.
Right? And so that's where the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain in an introvert, lights up more than it does for an extrovert. That would make sense because they're taking more time to think about the decision, whereas the extrovert does what feels right in the moment and just goes with it.
Right. And then it also talks about how there's just a lower baseline of cortical arousal for extroverts surrounding alertness, wakefulness, attention, and motivation. And so they're constantly searching for external arousal to raise those levels because it's a lower baseline. And if you flip over to introverts, they have a higher baseline of those things. So they have a better time with impulsive control, social behavior, and sensory signals. So basically, you guys, introverts, have that higher baseline. So you're not seeking that external environment to give you stimulation. If anything, you might be overly sensitive to stimulation that comes in externally.
And that's one of the things that was super interesting is that in the study, when they were looking at how an introvert responds to stimuli, the difference between introvert and extrovert, like we said, is the introvert already has a higher baseline of their response to arousal and stimulation. And so when they were shown facial expressions of happiness, sadness, and neutrality, the introverts actually responded. Their brains lit up more than the extroverts did. And it was interesting because when we read this part of the study, we were like, oh, that makes sense. That's why it exhausts introverts when they are at parties or social functions, because they are overstimulated by other people's emotions.
Right.
Which is why it drains them, because they're way more sensitive to people's emotions than extroverts are. So the extroverts
are
seeking that, because they have a lower baseline of that arousal level. So they're seeking other people's emotions. And when they get them, it feels good to them. Whereas introverts are like, I'm exhausted from feeling your emotions through our conversation. That was really interesting that they could show on an MRI how much more sensitive introverts are to stimuli than extroverts are, and that they discovered that baseline is actually lower for extroverts. And so that's why they're always seeking that external stimuli. And so one of the things that you had said is their brain lights up in the semantics and language and memory areas for an extrovert. And when you look at, again, in lay people's terms, extroverts are known to speak more, and they're action oriented. They're gregarious and expressive. They're excellent communicators. They enjoy being the center of attention.
We are. And yes, we do.
It makes sense that their brains light up in these different areas like language, and that, they don't light up in prefrontal cortex, and yet they're the ones that are prone to just taking action without thinking about it first. And so it's just very interesting that the science can actually back it all up, and it's not just some goofy BuzzFeed quiz.
Right. And I think what was super interesting, so we started looking at the research of where the foundation of extrovert versus introvert came from. And Carl, is it Jung or Young? It's Jung, but I'm not sure on pronunciation.
I don't know either.
We should look into that. But I was like, wait a second, I know that name. And then I said to Beth Ann, he's the one who discovered DISC. I remember learning about him in our community listens. And so it was really interesting because he said that introvert extrovert is the foundation of all personality tests, essentially. So I thought that was really interesting. The other part I found interesting was when they talked about the workplace. So they broke it down what the ideal work environment looks like for an introvert versus an extrovert. They talked about how extroverts prefer, so they did a study and they talked about how they preferred music and stimulation and sound in order to do their work the best way. And the study showed that introverts needed no noise or reduced noise because it was problematic in the workplace and it was a distraction. So you and I actually talked about this.
Yeah.
And for me, so I specifically remember two examples to share my extrovert side of this example. One was in college when I would write my final papers. I would have to have music on and have something in my ears, like good, fun, upbeat music with lyrics, because when I would try to sit and write good quality content with no sound or no music or lyrics, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It was the most uncomfortable thing for me. My college mates would be like, how are you doing that right now? Like, I need to focus.
Yeah, and I can listen to music with lyrics and I can listen to a book or a podcast if I'm designing.
Right.
And it doesn't take the language processing portion of my brain. But if I'm not designing, if I'm having to write, I have to listen to either like piano with no lyrics. I have to listen to something that doesn't have lyrics.
Right.
So I can hear the
Calm.
I can hear
What's
noise.
The playlist? Spotify calming piano.
Peaceful piano.
Peaceful piano.
Peaceful piano
Yes.
or productive morning. Both
Yes.
are really great playlists for me. But it is interesting because I have to put headphones on whether the office is quiet or not. So like it doesn't even matter
That's
that
so
the office
bizarre
is
to
quiet.
me.
It's like a trigger for me to put headphones on because that means that I'm forcing myself to focus. So anyway, it is interesting because in those ways we can see how we're both technically ambiverts when we look at the different situations and where we are on the sliding scale. But those are some examples of when we slide to our respective sides of the spectrum, introvert or extrovert.
That's a good example.
The other example that I would say would lend itself to when I'm more extrovert than introvert is, for instance, when I MC an event, right? So I can get up on stage and I can make jokes and be witty and, you know, those things that extroverts are, gregarious and center of attention, all of those things. And then after I get down off the stage and people are like, that was a great event, and I'll talk to them and be high energy and bouncing off the walls. But I swear to you, the moment I get in my car and the door shuts, it's like I could go to sleep for 4 days.
Sometimes, like after big events, you do have to, it takes you a minute to recharge. It takes you
Oh
days.
yeah, for sure. Because it takes everything in me where I can perform as the extrovert, and it's I do enjoy it. I love being on stage and getting to talk or teach. Like you and I both love that part is getting to teach a group of people, a room full of people. Doesn't intimidate either of us at all. The difference is you, after a training or event,
I'm on a high.
you're on a high.
Yeah.
Like you're ready to go out on the town, and I'm like, I think I'm sick. like
I need some tea and a blanket and some
tea
tissues.
and a blanket immediately, and I need to be unconscious. And so that's really the difference. We both enjoy the time of, but how we respond afterwards and need to recoup that energy. You're actually full of energy. I'm totally, completely depleted.
And speaking of public speaking, it's interesting because when we are looking at ambiverts, so extroverts are good at communicating and introverts are good at listening. But truthfully, you need both of those skills to be a good coach, a good leader, a good facilitator. And so it makes sense that we fall into ambivert in some of those areas because I think we're both good at speaking and we're both good at listening. So we have those qualities that mesh together in the middle where we live in the ambivert space.
It's interesting because the research was showing that introverts and extroverts can both be amazing leaders.
Yes.
what they found is that introverts are actually great leaders of teams that are proactive.
Yes.
And so teams that already know how to take charge, they know what they're doing. They
know
don't
it's coming.
they don't need a whole lot of hand holding. Whereas extroverts are great at leading teams that are looking to the top for direction.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was really interesting, that you can be an amazing leader even if you're on one side of the spectrum or the other for the most part. It depends on the team that you're leading.
Another thing, I think this was probably my biggest takeaway as we were diving into this. It was 3 researchers. I'm not sure of their name because there were a lot of them and they were hard to pronounce. So we just started reading the article saying 3 researchers said.
Yeah.
But they were talking about how when people go on the search to find the real them, so I have real me written down in quotes. So when you're discovering who you are, which this, right, like lit me up like a Christmas tree, because this is what we're all about, is helping people live their best lives and find their most authentic selves. They were saying extroverts, when they look to find that real me, that search in life, they go to social interactions, and introverts go to the internet.
Right.
So when I say go to the internet, I imagine that's like looking for self-help articles or looking for books or whatever.
Or even just getting your social interaction online.
On the internet, right.
And then you can be social when you want and when you have the energy to do so.
And I would think an example, a very black and white example of that would be if you're looking to search and find who you are and find your authentic you, an online version of that might be joining Facebook groups or communities online.
Right.
Whereas for an extrovert, it might be meeting new people or going to networking events. After they shared how extroverts and introverts search for the real me, they said the importance of expressing the real me, and we'll say the real you, is a crucial life skill. Those who cannot express their real me, the real you, are prone to serious psychological disorders.
So it's powerful.
Oh my gosh, imagine we're digging in about introverts and extroverts, and right in the middle lies this gem that validates all of the work we've been doing with Life with Beth and Court. And as we've shared with you before, we're releasing our first digital course this spring called the Exceptional Life Academy. And so it just felt really crazy and amazing that we've been doing this work to help people find their most authentic selves and build their best life. And then there's just this 2-line blow away.
Diamond in the rough, as Aladdin
in the
would
rough.
say.
And I was like, you need to write that down. We have to go back to that. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because basically we've been forming our course in helping people based on questions people ask us about how we do things or our advice on different things. And we kind of have started developing patterns of, we're like, oh, okay, well, it seems like a lot of people are struggling with this, or it seems like there's a lot of questions around this area, and maybe this is what is the key to helping them in this area. And so when you say that, all of a sudden right in the middle of a bunch of research, it validates what we're trying to teach people.
It's so amazing.
Because living authentically seems very nebulous. It's like, what does that even mean? It's different to everybody, so that makes it even harder, because what does authentic mean? Well, for some people it means X, for some people it means Y. And so for such a vague feeling topic that encompasses so much, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
Like if you don't find how to express the real you, you're going to suffer psychologically and thereby emotionally as well, I think.
Absolutely. So we will plug that in the show notes this time. If you guys are interested in learning more about our course, we will plug you to the wait list, and more details will be coming on that soon.
We'll also link the really powerful article that we read that has a ton of research about introvert, extrovert, ambivert on there for you. There is one quiz that they referenced that's kind of, I found it to be the easiest one to take, and they say it's also accurate. So it's from a TED Talk by Adam Grant. And so you can search Adam Grant, are you an extrovert, introvert, ambivert? And it'll come up with this quiz right off the TED website, and it's a 10-question quiz, and there's only 2 options for each question, and it'll pop out with, which of those you are on the spectrum. So just like with the DISC assessment, we find these things to be absolutely fascinating, and we also think that they're like the keys to a successful, happy life with the relationships around you.
Not only with relationships around you, but with yourself, to just understand and have an awareness of why you operate the way you innately do, I think is critical, because once you learn about yourself, then you can start to build relationships with others and learn about them. And it's this ripple effect that's so powerful.
Well, and it also helps you with this self-awareness aspect as well. Like when you realize, like you're saying, how you operate, it allows you to stop fighting against your natural way of operating. And you can say like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me because I operate this way and they operate that way.
Right.
I just am a different person and that's okay.
And respecting that we all operate differently. And again, like we discussed with the DISC assessment, it doesn't mean it's a cop-out. Like it doesn't mean that you get to behave a certain way and just be like, oh, sorry, I'm an extrovert. And I was sharing with you earlier that the ambivert, I think part of that comes from discipline. Part of it's based on circumstance, part of it is based on environment. But I think also as you become more disciplined and mature, you start to overlap those categories a little bit, at least for me, because I would say in my younger times,
When I was younger,
that I naturally defaulted to the far end of the extrovert spectrum. Whereas now I've learned balance and I have that maturity behind it to know different pieces.
So to give some concrete examples of that, before you used to default to always doing the talking, whereas now you know when it's appropriate to listen.
Yes.
Or you used to always default to being center of attention, but now you know when it's appropriate to let someone else have
discernment.
Center of attention.
I guess is the biggest. I think discernment could play a factor in being ambient. I lost it. I freaking lost it.
Discernment is the key to being a helpful sleep aid.
Ambivert. Oh my gosh. Well,
not omnivore.
So, I do have omnivore teeth. People will talk about my teeth and I say, thank you. I feel like they're dinosaur teeth. And they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, look how square and round and flat they are. I was obviously meant to eat lettuce. Yeah. So I thought I would just highlight some 10,000 foot level characteristics of each personality type. So extrovert has adaptive, risk taker, assertive, recharges through socializing and making decisions quickly. They speak more, prefer small and large group settings instead of one-on-one, outgoing, easily distracted. Mm-hmm. That one I'm pretty sure will never go away for me. Mm-hmm. Action oriented. And then on the flip side for introverts, we have reflective, private, thoughtful, recharge in time alone, reflect before making decisions, listen more, prefers one-on-one conversations, introspective, self-aware, and thinking before acting.
So the last piece of this is how these different characteristics interact with each other in a relationship.
When opposites attract.
All right, Crap Cat.
She just called me a Crap Cat.
Yeah, what's his name? MC Crap Cat?
MC Scat Cat.
All right, same difference.
Yeah, because when you hear about these two very opposing personalities, I think the common thought, and they even said this in the article, was like, whoa, how can they even be in the same room together? Or how can they coexist together? So that could be friendships, it could be your significant other, it could be in the workplace. And so it's just really challenging by nature because between the two, there are very different perspectives, and especially when it comes to communicating.
One of the examples that they gave in the article that we've seen in real life before is after a long day of work, an extrovert comes home and still wants to talk. And an introvert comes home and is like, I've had my fill of humans for the day. Like, I just need some time alone.
Yeah. And that's what they spoke to is communication is where it all boils down to, because we know effective communication is the root of a lot of essential things, especially in a relationship. And so when one's coming home wanting to rehash everything and the other one's like, I just need to recharge a bit, it can send signals of, well, I guess you don't think what I'm saying is important, or
or you're not interested.
You're not interested, or you're kind of aloof to the situation. Whereas I'm sorry, that was an extrovert. An extrovert might feel those things, whereas an introvert might be like, oh my God, stop talking. Like,
and if you don't know though, that the basis of it is where your energy is coming from and what you're needing. If you don't have the tools to even communicate in the same language, you don't know how to say like, hey babe, I just need some time alone to recharge real quick. I'd love to hear how your day is after about 20 minutes when I just have some alone time. Because like you said, to the other partner, it may seem like, why do you never want to talk when you get home? Like, you just shut me out. You go to your own space in the house.
Which leads to assumptions.
Right. And that's part of the reason that we find these different tools and resources helpful in being self-aware of identifying your tendencies and your natural behavioral patterns, so that you can have a shared language with significant others, with colleagues, with friends, so that you know how to identify what you're feeling, essentially.
And coming back to communication, so I think once you are immersed in this and you've practiced, you start to pick up on the cues. So I can tell by walking through the door if you're up for hearing a story, if you are up for hearing about my day, or if you're in a recharge zone. Like, I just pick up on the nonverbal cues and the energy. But in the beginning, it feels a little clunky, and you almost have to overly communicate and say, I feel like you're really not into this story right now. Is it that you're not interested? Like, it's asking those tough questions and having the awkward conversation. And then once you push through, it's like, no, I'm just really tired from my day. And you start to talk through it. So it wasn't always as eloquently obvious for us. We had to practice, and not in a passive way. Like, can I talk to you right? Not that kind of way, but just communicating.
But just saying, like, what headspace are you in right now? Because the worst thing is trying to talk to someone
when they're checked out.
Who's trying to recharge, and you basically are an interruption to them recharging,
right?
Which then creates frustration, and then you're like, I don't get it. I'm just telling you a story. I don't know why you're so frustrated right now.
So the analogy I'm thinking of that I pictured just when you shared that would be, if you're the introvert and you got home and you're trying to recharge, I imagine you plugging in your phone charger, and you're charging and you're getting there. And then the extrovert, me, comes through the door, who's super high energy, excited, wants to recap the whole day, tell you the stories. That's the equivalent of me ripping out your phone charger. And you're like, oh, I was starting to get there, and then you try to plug it back in, and I plug it back out, and basically just thinking of, I would rather you be fully charged, or maybe like 75%. I could work with 75% charge, so we're making the most of our interaction with each other, and there's not resentment.
Well, extrovert, I can tell you as the introvert, I prefer the 100% charge.
I'm sure you do. The other thing to consider in relationships outside of communication is how introverts and extroverts handle conflict. So introverts are less assertive, and they avoid conflict like the plague because it makes them uncomfortable. And an extrovert takes conflict head on. That's also something to be super mindful of with a significant other, friendship, relationship of some sort, in the workplace too, that you might have if you're an introvert and someone's coming at you hot and you're like, whoa, please don't ever talk to me again, or I need to go away from this situation.
Because if you just remember that introverts are extremely sensitive to external stimuli,
and we're coming in hot,
and you're coming in hot, like, that is going to be an absolute overload for an introvert.
Absolutely.
And again, like you said, it's not a cop-out where introverts are like, I'm an introvert, I can never have conflict. Obviously, introverts have to learn to, have healthy confrontation and learn how to communicate through that. However, as an extrovert, you have to realize you're a bit much for an introvert.
Extrovert and introvert couples are not doomed. It's about communicating and about identifying the differences and the preferences, and then coming together.
I thought this topic was fascinating.
Yes, I feel like I learned so much more by digging in than just going off of, because when we talked about this topic, I was like, yeah, I know what introvert and extrovert means. But once we dove in and we saw the neuroscience behind it, and we really, it was way bigger. It was way more eye-opening than I anticipated it to be. And I'm happy that we got to share that.
So as we always say, take what's helpful, leave the rest. We would love to hear what you got out of this episode. Hit us up over on our social channels on Facebook or Instagram at Life with Beth and Court. You can also check out the show notes at lifewithbethandcourt.com. And we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. So until next week, my friends, keep building your best life.
Bye, guys.